Sometimes trailers don't show off what a game really is like, and sometimes the developers overhype their game so heavily that people are extremely disappointed when a game fully releases and isn't what they thought it would be. We are going to be covering those types of games, and you probably know most of the games we have on this list. Some of these games have been abandoned, and some of them are totally different from when they launched. So here are our top 9 most overhyped games of all time. Watch Dogs is not a bad game, but before it launched back in 2014, Ubisoft launched a trailer for the game that looked incredible. The controversy was that the game didn't look like the trailer when it launched. They also promised a more advanced hacking system, which also didn't make it into the game. Watch Dogs 2 actually improved heavily on these mechanics, but it was the first game that totally pushed a lot of people away from the IP. Ubisoft didn't really do anything after the launch of the game to add any new features or fix the optimization, but some people still enjoy playing it. It might be worth it if you can get the game for a couple bucks, because you can get some decent hours out of it if you enjoy it. Just don't go into it with high expectations after what Ubisoft pulled.
Redfall was a game that I know a lot of us here at Cubo Gaming were extremely excited for. It was actually one of our most anticipated games of 2023, and it remained that way until we started to see some of the reviews coming out for the game. I think part of the reason it had such hype was because this was being made from a studio that brought us games like Prey, Dishonored, and Deathloop. Plus, just the concept of the game sounded fun. A vampire-themed open world where you and your friends go on missions and learn more about the story. Unfortunately, the game came out as a complete disappointment. It was extremely buggy, ran terrible, the story was just so boring and uninteresting, and there were just obvious budget cuts. I mean, even the cutscenes were so cheaply made that it was 1 or 2 frames of a scene with dialogue over it. It was a shame because this one was high up on our list, but it ended up just being another disappointment.
After several World War era Battlefield games, people were really looking forward to a modern one. Battlefield 2042 promised to deliver an unprecedented, destructible map with large-scale disasters, but honestly, it had worse destruction mechanics than the last couple Battlefield games. When the beta for the game was released, we were on vacation at the time, and we played it on our laptops, and even though it ran like trash, we still had a great time. After the game was finally released, we still enjoyed our time for at least a couple hours, but then it started to get old pretty quickly. The gunplay was honestly pretty solid, but everything else that makes Battlefield games good was missing entirely. It didn't take long for the player count to dwindle into pretty sad numbers, especially once the game started to get even more horrendous Steam reviews. Hopefully whoever made the decision to release it in that state has learned their lesson, because it's been a long time since we got a good Battlefield game.
Sea of Thieves is a big one for us because we jumped into the game a year after it came out. When the game first released, there was not much to do in terms of content. You could only work for 3 companies in the game, and the grind got really repetitive. If you got bored easily doing the same thing, then you would have stopped playing the game after around 10 to 15 hours, maybe even less. The game came out in 2018, and today it feels like an entirely different game. But back before it launched, people were really excited to play it. Plus, it was also an Xbox exclusive, so people were excited to get a new IP. If you didn't play the game because of the reviews back in 2018, we would recommend you go and check the game out now. You will be pleasantly surprised at how much content has been added.
Star Citizen was and is still a disappointment, but really for the reason that the game has, at the time of this recording, raised over $644 million in funding over the lifespan of the development. Just for some reference points, Cyberpunk 2077 cost $331 million to make, and GTA 5 cost around $126 million to make. The game is terribly optimized, and the new player experience is just awful. It's hard for people to really get invested in the game, and the pay ceiling, not only for the game, but the beefy PC you'll need to run it, is just way too high. It's been over a decade in development also. The game was supposed to be a massively successful game that lived up to the name, but unfortunately, it really only seems to be a game for a small niche group of people who are dedicated to playing the game and giving the developers more money. I mean, they even sell an everything pack that costs $48,000. They aren't even ashamed of it at this point. It's too bad, but I don't think this game will reach the heights that people thought it would, and at this rate, it will continue to be in the state it's in now, just for the purpose of generating more funding.
This game honestly didn't receive much hype when it was first announced during E3 2018, and players were a bit disappointed that they were working on this instead of Elder Scrolls 6. Despite that, Bethesda fans remained open-minded, and they hoped that Bethesda would succeed in creating a great new IP. Several years went by and gameplay was shown off, and people actually started to get more excited about it. When the game was finally released, it immediately started receiving criticism for being empty and boring. People were still on the fence about if it was a good game or not, and honestly, I enjoyed the game for about 20 hours. Then I started getting into Cyberpunk, and then I never really looked back. Now it seems like even the strongest Starfield supporters have kind of given up on the game and would rather play something with more substance. The news of Bethesda using the same dated engine for the Elder Scrolls 6 is honestly very disappointing. Anyone excited about that game should also try to keep their expectations in check.
No Man's Sky is possibly one of the biggest overhyped games of all time. Not only did the developers lie about what the game included, but it was one of the most boring games you can play when it came out in 2016. It was hyped up for years as this multiplayer space exploration game, but it disappointed most people who purchased it at the time. Like Sea of Thieves, No Man's Sky is an entirely different game now, with lots of stuff to do, and it's totally worth checking out if you're interested. The main reason it was disappointing for people is that the online co-op was a lie. When the game released, there was no online co-op. You can only see the names of planets people have found. It was an extremely boring procedurally generated world that felt empty, but it still felt better than Starfield when it came to exploration.
Oh, I'm sure everyone saw this one coming. So, The Day Before, if you haven't already heard, was one of the most scammy and disappointing games to ever come out. This game at one point was the most wishlisted game on Steam. I think people were really holding out for it to bring back the zombie survival era of gaming, and I know we were really looking forward to it as well. Unfortunately, the developers lied about the game ever truly being worked on, and they instead released fabricated footage to string people along. They then released an incredibly rushed game that was anything but a game. It was like a demo run. You can't even buy the game now because it was removed from Steam. I don't think we need to say too much about this one. It's one of the worst games to have ever been made and was a massive failure.
While this game actually turned out to be a great game after several updates, no one can deny that it was extremely overhyped. I remember back when people were acting like this game would let them live an entirely new life and that it would change the gaming industry as a whole. On our podcast, we predicted several times that people were setting themselves up for disappointment by hyping it up so much, and that's exactly what happened. The game released majorly unfinished, and it had some horrible bugs that would have been bad even in a beta build of the game. Thankfully, CD Projekt Red vastly improved the game with updates, and they've delivered a very well-received DLC. Despite that, the game releasing in this state was a lot of wasted potential. It's a great example of why gamers shouldn't set unrealistically high expectations for any game, and it goes to show why pre-ordering games can be a bit of a gamble sometimes.
So those were the most overhyped games of all time. If you were in any of the crowds that were hyped about any of these games, let us know down in the comments section below. Also consider giving this video a like and subscribing if you enjoy our content. We also have a gaming podcast called Cast where we talk about anything gaming related. All links are in the description, and thanks for watching.